arrival, everyone. We're going to get going. Feel free to still grab your snacks in the back. No worries. I understand it's important to have nourishment. And let's get started. So, as I said, good arrival, everyone. I am delighted to welcome you to the 6th annual Fritzi Weitzmann Owens Memorial Lecture, produced by the Of Many Institute for Multi-Faith Leadership through the Center for Global Spiritual Life. This is our first lecture in this series since 2019, which was the last time we gathered in this way before the devastating onslaught of the pandemic. It truly is a blessing to be here in community with each of you tonight. Right now, our world is in horrific and heartbreaking turmoil, and many of us are unsure how to help our democracy move forward in a way that affirms our equal belonging. Each of us live this life within our own bodies and perceive the world through those bodies, which means our perspectives, our experiences, and our understandings will be different, even conflicting. Tonight, the Of Many Institute for Multi-Faith Leadership invites you to join us and ponder with curiosity, compassion, and candor our individual and collective contributions and roles in shaping our shared future. Please join me for a moment of silence for personal reflection and tribute to your individual experience. I also ask that we take a moment to acknowledge our ancestors and the land in which we gather, that of the Lenape people. Tonight, we are honored to host Eboo Patel, author, speaker, educator, and interfaith leader. Named one of America's best leaders by U.S. News World Report, Eboo is founder and president of Interfaith America, the leading interfaith organization in the United States. Under his leadership, Interfaith America has worked with governments, universities, private companies, and civic organizations to make faith a bridge of cooperation rather than a barrier of division. He is the author of 5 books, and his latest, We Need to Build, Field Notes for Diverse Democracy, was presented to the first 75 attendees at tonight's talk. Please enjoy. It's very good. The Of Many Institute for Multi-Faith Leadership was founded in 2011 by Imam Khalid Latif, Rabbi Yehuda Sarna, Dr. Chelsea Clinton, and our now NYU president, Dr. Linda Mills. Tonight's event builds on the success of their vision to create spaces where people from a manifold of backgrounds can each come explore their faith in community with one another. The Of Many Institute has since grown beyond our wildest dreams and is now one facet of the Center for Global Spiritual Life. The Center for Global Spiritual Life offers religious, spiritual, and secular communities empowering tools for self and community care, bridge building, and resilience. We provide opportunities for members of the NYU global community to strengthen their sense of belonging, purpose, transcendence, and capacity for storytelling. We empower our students to find, cultivate, and amplify their leadership so that they may go out from NYU empowered to model spiritual pluralism, holistic well-being, civic engagement, and religious literacy. We want to thank each of you for being here tonight in support of such a needed conversation. We engage our community through public programs and conversations like these, through our award-winning Faith Zone religious literacy training, as well as trainings in community cultivation and mindful living. We offer a minor in multi-faith and spiritual leadership, and we support student-led meditation and religious clubs and our Student Multi-Faith Advisory Council. We offer an award-winning mindfulness program with daily yoga and meditation classes and cohort-based learning programs. And we have 70 spiritual life advisors, several who are here tonight, who offer pastoral care as well as leadership to their respective faith communities. It takes a lot to organize a night like this, and we had an extraordinary team behind the scenes making it happen. I would like to first thank my amazing team, the dedicated GSL, Chelsea Garbell, Robert Taylor Jr., and Ariana Waters, our student employees who work hand in hand with our full-time staff on almost all of our authoring, as well as our spiritual life advisors, NYU leadership, NYU operations, and of course, the Owens family, for generously gifting our community with this important lecture series to hear from great minds out in the world doing the work of interreligious engagement. Thank you. And for that, can we give a round of applause? A few logistic items before I turn it over to Fritzi Weitzmann Owens' granddaughter, Gusty, who has graciously agreed to share a bit about the late Fritzi Weitzmann Owens. On your seat, you should have pens and index cards. After the lecture portion, we will be hosting a Q&A with Eboo. Please write any questions that arise for you on this card. A member of our team will be picking them up by 6:55. I'll do my best to get to as many questions as I can when I join Eboo in conversation later this evening. So with that, I hope this evening is meaningful for you. And now I have the pleasure of introducing you to Gusty Owens.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Melissa, for the introduction and your thoughtful opening remarks. It was really wonderful to hear from you, and I'm really grateful to Of Many and the Center for Global Spiritual Life for having this event and bringing us all together. And my first ever internship was actually at the Center for Global Spiritual Life, so it has a very special place in my heart. And I want to really welcome you all to the Fritzi Weitzmann Owens Memorial Lecture. My grandmother actually would have been turning 100 this year, so it feels really wonderful to celebrate her life with you all in this way. My family is so honored to be here with you all, and there are a lot of different ways to honor someone's legacy, and I'm really grateful that coming together, learning, and being in community is one of the ways that we're able to honor my grandmother's legacy. When my grandmother was 14, she and a dozen of her relatives were able to safely flee Nazi-controlled Austria because of the help of the Muslim king of Albania at the time. This instilled in her very early on an appreciation and an interest in the importance of multi-faith, and that really carried throughout her life. When she arrived in New York City, she enrolled in a technical high school and always was really interested in going to college, but wasn't able to for a variety of reasons. But she always was really interested in education and put tremendous importance on it in our family. She instead went to work in the family photo studio, which she also loved because she really loved the arts. And through that tremendous value that she placed in education, she was really a lifelong learner, whether it was through the arts, through religion, through ensuring that her children and grandchildren always had access to the best quality education possible. And most importantly for tonight's conversation, she really valued education just through conversation. And oftentimes an anchor of that was food, whether it was cooking traditional family recipes or coming together for a Jewish holiday. That conversation and exchange of ideas, especially with young people, was really important to her and really brought her a lot of joy. And just in the context of her legacy, I hesitate that saying that interfaith is more important now more than ever, because that was true last year and it'll be true next year too. But in that vein, I'm really grateful that you're all here for tonight's program. And I'm really excited to welcome tonight's speaker, the founder and president of Interfaith America, Eboo Patel, someone that my family has really enjoyed following over the years. I distinctly remember about 20 copies of Acts of Faith being in my dining room, and my family handing them out to guests if we already hadn't put them on to his work previously. So with that, I'm really excited to welcome Eboo Patel.
We have before us a momentous opportunity to create the world's first truly interfaith nation. We need to build American Medina, a city on a hill made holy by the wideness of its welcome, the strength of its bonds. Look at it shining. The Catholic university where Muslim immigrants learn, the Jewish hospital where Hindu babies are born. The eyes of the world are upon you. We need to build a Sangha whose chants of loving kindness change the climate, bridge divides and bind hearts. We need to build the beloved community where we see each other, the Baptists and Mormons who farm fields and fight fires together, the witnesses who watch over the whole block. We need to build the new Jerusalem, tents for angels to dwell, tabernacles for the tribes, 12, 12,000, 12 million. They will not cease to be diverse. They come from across the earth, seeking the sacredness of knowing one another. Every refugee a pilgrim, every stranger a friend, until we are a nation. This Interfaith America, pluralist Rashtra, diverse democracy, achieving our country, where our hopes are prophecies, where we offer Longar to our friends and our enemies, where we do not wait for sickness to pray for one another's health, where we defeat the things we do not love by building the things we do. We need to build.
Evening, everyone. Thank you for coming tonight. Thank you to Gusty for a beautiful introduction. Thank you to Bob and Evie and your families for being here. Melissa, thank you for your stewardship, you and your team's stewardship of one of the jewels in the crown of interfaith spaces in the nation, really, for your leadership here. And that whenever people say, what could an interfaith space look like on a college campus? I'm like, well, you should go to NYU and see what they've built. So thank you for what you've done here. So it is inspiring and daunting to know that Fritzi Owens would have been 100 years old this year. There's a great insight by T.S. Eliot that we don't inherit traditions, we work to make ourselves worthy of them. And so may this talk and our conversation and our time together make us worthy of the tradition and the tradition that she lived, the legacy that she left, and the aspiration that she would have us all live up to. I want to begin with something of a colloquial story, if you will. So when I was a junior in high school, this is probably 1991, 1992, my mom asked a question that made my life considerably more delicious. She said, "Would you like to have turkey for Thanksgiving or biryani this year?" I mean, anybody ever had biryani? The answer to that is obvious, right? And there's a deep logic to my mom's thinking. So don't get me wrong, the turkey is a wonderful bird. It's a perfectly nice fowl, if you will. But as far as a dish goes, I mean, it can be improved upon, let us say. My mom's thinking to herself, we Muslims from South Asia, we have a feast food. We have a celebration food. And Thanksgiving is a feast and a celebration. So why wouldn't we prepare the far tastier celebration food of our culture for the feast day of the nation in which we live? Thank you. And we had biryani. This is Glen Ellen, Illinois in the early 1990s. Can you guess how many people at Glenbard South High School I told that my family was having biryani for Thanksgiving instead of turkey? Anybody want to venture a guess? 0. So now here's what's interesting. My friends, people I'm still close to today, included a South Indian Hindu, a Cuban Jew, a Mormon, a Catholic, a Lutheran, a Nigerian evangelical. I promise you, turkey was not the main dish at everybody's Thanksgiving. My South Indian Hindu friend's family was vegetarian. None of us talked about the distinctive religious and ethnic foods we were having on an American feast day. There is a diversity paradigm that describes this reality. It's called the melting pot. The idea is that we should all melt our distinctiveness into the same general goo. Everybody's heard of this diversity paradigm. I grew up in the 80s and 90s. This is the paradigm that I grew up with. For those of you who were born and raised in the 21st century, this is ancient history to a lot of you. In all honesty, you grew up with a different diversity paradigm. But for those of us whose formative years were in the late 20th century, you could have biryani at home, you just didn't talk about it at school. At school, you just did what everybody else did. You ate what they ate, you wore what they wore, you listened to what they listened to. That's the melting pot. Let me tell you something. The melting pot was a step forward for 1907. And I'm being serious when I say that, right? That's when the term was invented. It's the title of a play by a guy named Israel Zangwill, who is a refugee from Russia, a Jewish refugee from Russia, and who witnesses back in Russia very ugly pogroms against minorities. And he comes here and he says, you know what? We don't bring our conflicts here. It's actually a really important thing to consider. Conflicts elsewhere should not pattern relationships here. The problem with that is, should we not bring something of our identity? Should we not be proud of our distinctiveness? So the melting pot is a step forward if the alternative is conflict between identity groups. And by the way, what happens not long after 1907? World War I in Europe, right? Tens of millions of people die in ethno-national conflicts. The United States has a lot of ugliness in the early 21st century, but not that level of conflict. The melting pot is a step forward for that period in time. But for our period, we need a different metaphor. And what I want to suggest is the way we think about American democracy is it's a potluck. Could it save our democracy? Let's discuss. But let's talk for a moment about what a potluck is. Okay? This is, again, extremely familiar, but I actually think the best metaphors and the best symbols are extremely familiar. The big idea of a potluck is that you want to gather a diverse array of people and invite them to bring a dish that is distinctive to their identity and household to a common space. And in that common space, things work best if there are interesting creative combinations between those dishes and enriching conversations between diverse people. So everything I'm describing is super straightforward, super colloquial, super familiar, and totally magic. This is the everyday magic of American civic life. Let's break this down. Number one, everybody is a contributor. Have you, by the way, hands up in here, you've been to a potluck, you brought a dish. Okay, keep your hands up if you've hosted a potluck. Okay, so has anybody ever said to anybody, if you've hosted a potluck, hey, I know that you are too marginalized to bring a dish? A totally serious question. Has anybody ever said that? Everybody else can bring a dish. You are too oppressed to bring a dish. No. The assumption is everybody can bring a dish. Everybody is a contributor. Everybody's going to enrich this space. Now, people are aware that it's easier for some folks than others. If you have a really nice house with a nice kitchen, it's going to be easier. If you have a nice car that you can bring that food in, it's going to be easier. There are barriers to some people's contributions. We realize that. But the barriers don't define people. The contributions define people. So that's the first thing. The assumption in a potluck is that everybody is a contributor. By the way, you don't have a kitchen, you show up early and you help clean the space before other people come. Everybody knows they have to contribute. Part one. Part two, as much as I like biryani, and for whoever has not had it, I highly suggest it, I don't want a potluck of all biryani. And as much as you might like hummus or falafel or munsaf or hamburgers or whatever, you don't want a potluck with just that kind of food. A potluck is the most delicious, the most wonderful, the most beautiful if there's a diverse array of food that shows up. If you have a wide variety of contributors. Everybody knows that. Everybody knows that, right? And here's the third thing. You don't actually just want there to be an array of food. You want people to kind of mix the food together. There's nothing better at a potluck than to hear somebody say, oh my gosh, I never knew how awesome this crusty bread recipe from Eastern Europe would go with this spicy dip from the Middle East. I never knew. And you know what we call that? America. Okay? We call that a space where people from the four corners of the earth, praying in different ways, speaking in different languages, bringing their dishes from their identities, come to a single space and build out of it a community. That's called America. Where else do you get this very interesting combination of people, each invited to bring their dish to the table? Where else do you get those cool combinations? There are kosher Chinese restaurants in New York. How awesome is that? They don't even know it's magical. They just think it's normal, right? They just think it's normal. There are Korean tacos in Chicago. They don't even know it's magical. They just think it's normal. People come here and they bring their dishes to the table, and those dishes are in beautiful and creative interaction. And those people are in enriching conversation. One of the great thinkers of diversity, of diverse democracy, is a guy named John Courtney Murray, a Jesuit scholar, early 20th century. And you know what his definition of civilization is? Civilization, like there is no wider kind of entity than a civilization. It's wider than a community, it's wider than a nation, right? Civilization. There's Islamic civilization, there's Chinese civilization, et cetera, et cetera. He says, the definition of civilization is easy. It's people living and talking together. That's the definition of civilization. What do you do at a potluck? That's living and talking together. That's living and talking together. What else makes a potluck special? No mayor, no general, no president, no governor can command you to do it. It is the ultimate civic form. Citizens, and by citizen, I mean anybody who participates in public life, put together their own potlucks. They create their own spaces. It is a form that we generate and create for ourselves. And when I ask people, how many of you have participated in a potluck? Virtually every hand in the room went up. We do this ourselves. We are the generators of this civil society. So for about 15 months after college, every Tuesday night I hosted a potluck. It started with like 5, 7 people and it grew to like 60, 70 people in this little 1.5 bedroom apartment in this liminal neighborhood between Lincoln Park and Logan Square in Chicago. And so like I have lived this, and I have to tell you something. The first few potlucks, I like lost sleep on Monday night. The potlucks were always Tuesday night. I lost sleep on Monday night. You want to know why? Be like, are the vegans going to be mad? Seriously, right? Like something could go wrong. And just think about the million things that could go wrong in a potluck. And you know what's kind of wild? It almost never does. It's possible someone could bring poison. It's true. It's possible. Almost never happens, right? Totally possible that a group of vegans could show up. By the way, like, you know, I come out of like hippie world, you know, like kind of pacifist Grateful Dead world, and vegans all over my world, you know. Possible they could show up and be like, I am offended by even the presence of chicken salad at this potluck. Never happened. It's possible that Muslims and Jews could show up and be like, somebody brought bacon?
I can't be here. But you know what actually happens? People ask, hey, who's coming to this potluck? Because I am going to bring a dish from my identity that is respectful of their identities. So if Muslims and Jews are coming, maybe you bring turkey bacon. If vegans are coming, maybe you do the vegan version of your dish. If you know that there's going to be people with allergies to a variety of things, you carefully label your food. Again, no mayor, no president, no general, no governor requires you to do it. We just do it ourselves. We just do it ourselves. So why is this so important? Because the potluck is actually a metaphor not just for diversity, which is obvious, right? I mean, how cool would it be if me and my little ethnic group of friends, this South Indian Hindu, all have names. I'm going to name them. It's like 20 years, past high school. I can name them. Karthik, my South Indian Hindu friend. Hej, my Nigerian evangelical friend. Ariel, my Cuban Jewish friend. If all of us talked about the interesting ethnic, national, religious food on our table at Thanksgiving, and we had a potluck of it, and we were respectful of the other people's identities, right? So you didn't bring pork or meat because there's going to be Jews, Hindus, and Muslims there. You figured something else out. So I'll tell you something. It's a pretty good way to build a society. And it's not a bad description of America, because a huge part of our society is generated by our citizens. And I want to say again, my definition of citizen is Aristotelian. It is people who participate in public life. It's got nothing to do with your papers. I could care less, honestly. People who participate in public life. Our society, America, has been built by us. Our 2,600 universities, half of them have been built by identity communities. Even the ones built by the state or funded by the state were built by the civic identity communities in that geography. Our hospitals, many of them built by identity communities. Our K through 12 schools, our social service agencies, many of them built by identity communities. It is people bringing their dish to the potluck in the form of a university. What do you think Notre Dame is? What do you think Georgetown is? What do you think Columbia is? What do you think NYU is? It is a dish brought to the potluck by an identity community. And it is the pillar of a civilization. The pillar of a civilization. This is how a diverse democracy operates. People build institutions out of the inspiration of their identity that serve everybody. I have a very personal story of this. I bet you do too. I am in this country because a university founded by French Catholic priests in 1842, at a time of deep and ugly anti-Catholicism. A university founded for the express purpose of lifting up poor Midwestern Catholic boys, found fit to admit a wayward Ismaili Muslim into their MBA program in the mid-1970s. That man was my father. My father is not a particularly ritualistic Muslim, but when he goes to the grotto at Notre Dame University before a football game, he cups his hands in prayer and says the Fatiha from the Quran. He is perfectly aware that it was the faith of those French Catholic priests that gave rise to a university, and it was the interpretation of that faith by people in the mid-late 20th century, principally Father Ted Hesburgh, that invited him to come to that place. Notre Dame is a dish of the American potluck. And what's interesting is that within that single dish, there is diversity. And this is one of the most remarkable features of American civil society. The Inner City Muslim Action Network on the southwest side of Chicago, for my money, the most impressive Muslim organization in the nation. If you go there on a Tuesday afternoon, the people in the health clinic will be people of one ethnic identity. The people in the arts program will be people of another ethnic identity. People in the community organizing training will be people of a third ethnic identity. And the people who started the organization and lead it and fund it, Muslims. And very few of the people who are beneficiaries of the program are Muslim. And that is why it's such an impressively Islamic organization. Because it is Muslim identity that gave rise to an institution that serves everybody. A Muslim dish in the American potluck. What does it look like if we think of our society as a potluck? If we ask the question, what dish am I bringing? What dishes am I a beneficiary of? What combinations can I facilitate? What conversations can I nurture? When am I a contributor? When am I a host? How do I encourage other people to be contributors? How do I teach other people to be hosts? This is the Tocquevillian vision. Alexis de Tocqueville says 200 years ago, in England, the church does, in England, the government does everything. In France, the church does everything. In America, the people come together in associations based on their particular identities, and they're the ones who make the contributions. Dishes to the American potluck. So now there are dangers here, and I want to talk about two of them. One danger is obvious, and it's the danger of white Christian nationalism. It is an obvious danger, it is in your face, and it is ugly. People who carry tiki torches in Charlottesville and say Jews do not replace us and encourage Muslim bans, they are against the American potluck. They are not just in favor of the melting pot, they are carrying around a furnace and they are melting your dish into that goo. That is a danger. That is an obvious danger. We should be aware of it. Should not be afraid to say it. It is an obvious danger. If you'll allow me, I want to say a word about a more subtle danger as I close here. And it's the danger of confusing the barrier and the contribution. It's a more well-meaning danger, but it's a danger nonetheless. What do I mean by confusing the barrier and the contribution? Everybody knows that we don't start from a level playing field. Everybody knows some people have big kitchens and other people have small kitchens. Everybody knows some people live in places where they can walk to the potluck comfortably, and other people have to take 2 buses and 3 trains. There's a little bit of a spirit right now of confusing that barrier, which we should erode. We should one day eliminate. But that barrier doesn't define the person. You're not defined by the things you can't do or the things that are standing against you. You're defined by your contribution. And as I said, nobody in the history of potlucks has ever said, I know you're too marginalized to contribute. Because gosh, that's an insult. Everybody can do something. And you got to figure out what that is. That's your job. That's your job. You figure out how to name somebody's contribution. So I want to tell you a story. I began with a kind of a familiar colloquial story from my own high school years. I want to end with a story of my son's high school years. And this is a theme that I'm seeing in my son's life. He's 16 years old, but it's a particular story that happened to happen a week ago. So it's salient for me. So I'm in my living room, and it's a Friday afternoon, home the early side from work. My son walks through the door. It's 4 o'clock. It's after school. and he's on the phone. He's got his AirPods in, and he's talking on the phone, and I'm only hearing his side of the conversation. And I kind of gathered quickly that this is the interview that he's doing to be the speaker at this gala for this arts organization he's a part of. He volunteers for this cool arts organization. And I know that he's been wanting to be a speaker at the gala, and I know it's an application process and an interview, and okay, he must be doing the interview, so I'm hearing him. So he says, and again, I'm only hearing his side of the conversation. Yes, I'm a good public speaker. Yes, I've given a lot of public speeches. Pause. I'd be happy to send you video. I really enjoy public speaking. Pause. Other person must be talking. Yes, I'm a minority. Yes, my parents are from another country. My dad was born in India. Yes, we're from a minority faith. We're Ismaili Muslims. My dad's an Ismaili Muslim. My mom's a Sunni Muslim, but our practice at home is Ismaili. Long pause. My son makes a face and says, am I marginalized? I mean, that's not how I see myself. I'm a minority. I mean, yeah, I guess I've been called names at school, but my parents are always talking about the privilege of our identity. Could I say I was marginalized on stage? I mean, I don't really want to. Is Aiden marginalized? His other friend who's in this arts program? I mean, he's black. That's what you mean. But he's like got all this stuff going for him. He's a great hockey player. He's got lots of friends. Could I think about whether I could say I was marginalized? I mean, if you want me to. And then he hangs up the phone and he looks at me and he's like, that's not the first time that's happened. And I'm thinking to myself, there's somebody on the other side of the phone who has an investment in my son defining himself, or at least presenting himself as marginalized. They want him to think of himself as being defined by the barrier, not by his contribution. What they're doing is actually in deep contradiction to everything we talk about in our home, which is the privilege of your identity carries with it a solemn responsibility. The privilege of being Fritzi Owens' granddaughter carries with it a solemn responsibility. Yes, some things will be harder for you. Your name is Zaid, not Brian. That's life. There's 8 billion people in the world. Trust me, you can deal with being called some names at school. 4 billion of those people live on less than $7 a day. 1.5 billion of those people live with parasitic worms. Some things might be harder for you. Do not confuse things that might be harder with being somebody who defines themselves by the barrier and not the contribution. But as I thought more of this, and I thought to myself, all these subtle signals from college counselors, if you can write an essay about how your minority identity has made you feel oppressed, selective colleges will put you in the "we'll consider him" pile. That diversity fellowship that he was a part of, that always had 2 circles, the circle of the people who were privileged and the circle of the people who were marginalized. And Zaid comes home one day and he says, Dad, how come only the white, straight Christian boys get to call themselves privileged? It's an interesting formulation. Get to call themselves privileged. What a privilege to call yourself privileged. To look at the world and realize how lucky you are. Because honestly, it's just an objective fact vis-a-vis the 8 billion other people on the planet. And also, if you are a steward of an identity, whether it's Muslim or Hindu or Jewish or a family legacy or an ethnic legacy, an identity that inspires the dishes you bring to the potluck. I promise you, the people who told you those stories did not tell them to you in the frame of how marginalized you are. I bet you they told them to you in the frame of, this is how lucky you are. This is how blessed you are. This is what you have to live up to. Now I know you can do it, but it is work to make yourself worthy of the legacy you carry. In our case, the legacy that we carry, the spiritual knowledge that God gives us his breath, his ruh, that he makes us his abd and khalifa, his steward and representative on earth, that the gift that he gives us that distinguishes us from the angels is the gift of flowing with diversity, and that the dishes that we bring to the American potluck have to live up to that legacy, have to be a part of that tradition. And the reason I love the potluck so much is because I want to know what your legacy is, what your tradition is, what is magnificent about your identity story. What dish do you bring? And if there are barriers that make it harder, I want to erode those barriers. But I do not want to spend 90% of the conversation talking about the barriers because your contribution is too important. Your identity is too magnificent. That's what I want to focus on. That's what I want to focus on. Listen, for me, this comes down to 4 simple lines. Diversity is a treasure. Cooperation is better than division. Identity is a source of pride. Faith is a bridge. That's what this place is about. That's what Melissa's leadership is about. That's what the Owens Lecture is about. Thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay? Okay. Thank you. What a gift that was. Thank you so much. Do you want to take a second before we jump in?
Thank you.
Okay.
I do want to say my friend Irshad Maji's here. I'm so happy about that. Thanks for coming, Irshad. NYU is lucky to have her.
Thank you.
Oh, you're back. You're back. You be visiting.
Before we jump into conversation, I wanted to just give a reminder. You're going to see these cards on your chairs, and they're also going to be on the table outside. There's about 5 or 6 questions at the bottom. I invite you after the lecture, after the Q&A, to go out and meet someone you haven't met yet, meet someone you don't know, meet someone that looks different than you, and discuss these questions. Get to know someone else through these questions. Embrace them in them, okay? Thank you. All right, so I have some questions here for you. And the first one I want to talk about is there is a huge spotlight, as you know, on IDBEA right now in our nation.
On what?
IDBEA.
Which is?
Inclusion, belonging, equity, accessibility, okay? And in my work, I talk a lot about engaging difference from an asset-based approach.
Yeah.
And your idea of a potluck feels very much as asset-based. What do you think is the first step in moving a large group of people, say a campus community, from a deficit model to an asset model and engaging lines of difference?
Yeah, it's a great. So I love the work you do, and I love that you approach it that way. So, I mean, I think that this was the focus of the talk, right? Like we understand people as contributors. You understand people as contributors because they are, and you ask what dish they're bringing to the potluck, and however that metaphor works in a particular situation. In a classroom, it might be what's your insight into the text, right? In a student group, it's what's the leadership role that you can play, and I think it's partially the job of the leader to bring that out of somebody, right? That is the definition. Part of the definition of leadership is, are you encouraging people to contribute what they can, right? And look, I love diversity work. I love diversity work because I think about it as encouraging people to bring their contributions to the table and then creating combinations of those contributions, just like a potluck, right? I think of it as I think of it as what makes a civilization a civilization. It is living and talking together.
That's right. And so in that civilization, when we're living and talking, there's a set of values and practices. So in November, you published an article inside Higher Education titled Campuses Need Centers for Pluralism. What values and practices do you feel universities need to incorporate in order to bring your idea to fruition?
So Andy Delbanco, who teaches up the road from you all at Columbia University, he wrote this great book called College. He's the Alexander Hamilton professor at Columbia University. And it opens with this insight. He said, listen, if you were to make a list of the civilizational achievements of American civilization, again, like civilization is like the broadest entity you can think of, right? It's larger than nation, right? If you think about America as a civilization, what are our achievements? Okay, the Constitution, baseball, jazz, rock and roll, hip hop, right? He said in any list of American achievements, our system of higher education would be on that list. And so I just love kind of marinating in that. Like, we sit in a civilizational achievement. If you are associated with a university, you are literally part of the great achievements of American civilization. Just like, take a moment, right? Why is that? Why is it that, Daniel Poitras Moynihan, the great intellectual and senator, said, if you want a great city, build a great university and wait 200 years? Think about that for a second, right? A really smart American in the 20th century said that. You want a great city, build a great university and wait 200 years. Okay. So what does a university do? It gathers people from a diversity of identities and a divergence of ideologies in considerate conversation. Alistair McIntyre at Notre Dame says that a university initiates you into constrained conflict. What a beautiful insight. A university initiates you into constrained conflict, and it teaches you how to order your arguments about a nation's conflicts in a rational way. And it is so good at that the rest of the society learns from the university how to order its own arguments. Okay, pause. You being successful at that? I don't know what's going on at NYU. Right? I'm like, that is the question I ask at any university that I am at. The idea of a university is you are so good at rationally ordering your arguments around the conflicts in a society that other sectors of it, the business community, the medical community, other people should come here and say, I want to watch how this is being done, because this is what you all specialize in. Right? You take the hard issues, an issue that a company would say, you know what, we're making a product or a service, we can't deal with that. We're going to have the university deal with that, because that's what they do. They deal with hard issues. And they rationally order their arguments around those issues. So I think that's an interesting thing. Like, are you doing that well to the point where you could literally see a group of people watching and saying, oh, that's how we should do it. That's how we should deal with this issue, right? What else do? You help set the civic priorities of the nation. The things that matter at universities come to matter in the nation. It's really important. You create a knowledge base around those civic priorities. You help adolescents become adults. Those adults go on to lead some of the nation's most important sectors.
That has me thinking about, you said tonight at the potluck to make sure you're highlighting the contributor. I think you said exactly, figure out how to name someone's contribution.
Yeah.
And I think it's important that we not only name others' contributions, but we help, especially our students, name their own contributions, identify them and name them. I think we also need to think about how are we contributing to the barriers, right? To be conscious of, are you actually contributing to barriers too, and in which ways are you doing that? And to have agency over that. And in your podcast episode, which inspired this whole night, You asked some of your guests about the barriers that they've faced to participating in our national potluck. I'm curious if you're willing to answer this. Would you share a time that you contributed to building a barrier for someone else? What did you learn from that experience, and how did you shift it? How did you shift your perspective and influence the work for the better?
Yeah. So you shared these questions with me beforehand, and this is an especially challenging one.
Yes.
It's a hugely challenging one. So, on a personal level, like at my 20th high school reunion, I literally walked up to a couple people and I said, you may or may not remember this, but I was a jerk to you at this point, like in 7th grade, and I'm sorry about that, right? So that's a very small thing, but like, you know, the older I get, the more I'm like, you know what, like Jeff Bezos once said, like, honestly, there are lots of times when being kind is better than being smart, you know? And there were times when I wasn't kind, and those times those are I say this to my kids all the time. I'm like, you will remember the times when you were unkind to people, and don't do it, right? So I want to say that's just being human, okay? But I want to say a second thing, which I think is a part of all of our lives, and I don't have a good answer to this. I think this is a really challenging one. So if you go to a selective 4-year residential university and you join the knowledge class, our world is eating the previous economy. We're eating it, right? So your job as part of the knowledge class is to take a factory that 1,000 people worked in 1980 and make it a place that can produce 3 times the amount of goods with 10 people rather than 1,000. That's your job. So what happens to those other 990 people? You're on to the next factory to slim down from 1,000 to 10. Right? By the way, this is, I am implicated in that. This is not like the other people, right? Like if you are part of the knowledge economy, this is what you do. This is what we do. And I think how we think about that is really important, right? And like, if I was a university president, you know how I would begin my address to the first-year class. You are amongst the most privileged people in human history. That would be my first line. And that's not a scold. I'm not scolding you. It's just a fact. That's just a fact. Okay? Forget that you're amongst the most privileged people right now, right? So just give you some numbers. The percentage of people in the United States who are college graduates, roughly 35%. So if you have a degree from a 4-year university, you're in the magic upper third of American society. There's roughly 2,600 colleges and universities in the United States. Roughly 10% are selective. Okay. So if you have a degree from one of the 260 selective universities in America, you're in the upper 10% of the upper 40%. So what rank is NYU? So if you go to NYU, you're in the upper 1%. It's about the extent of my math right there. You're in the upper 1% of the upper 35%. It's just a fact. You're amongst the most privileged people in the nation right now and in human history. Okay, that's not a scold. Here's the question. How are you going to prepare yourself over the next 4 years to be as much use as possible to this society? In Islamic terms, to be Rahmatul Alameen, a special mercy upon all the worlds. What are you going to do to live into that? And what a gift, right? I don't want my sons, I don't want myself, I don't want you to feel bad about being privileged. I want you to be like, alhamdulillah, I'm privileged. Okay, I have the opportunity to be of service in a way that other people don't. That's not a burden, right? There's like all this wind at my back, but I got to make myself worthy of that. I got work to do. Right? And so I would like people who have the great benefit of residential four-year higher education, particularly in a selective university, to be thinking to themselves, how am I Rahmatul Alameen, a special mercy upon all the worlds, with special attention to people who do not go to college, because their world is being eaten.
Yeah. With everything going on in the world and witnessing it and being in the four-year institution or just living your daily life, I'm hearing from quite a lot of our students and community members this feeling of just being disheartened. And they feel like the intergroup and interfaith work that they've dedicated their lives to might be in vain. What would your guidance be to someone who's feeling hopeless about engagement across religious and political difference?
Yeah, so there's at least two questions there,
Yes,
right?
there is.
So I'm gonna address the first one first. So Martin Luther King Jr. has this great, I forget which talk it is. It might be Remaining Awake During a Great Revolution. It might have, but he basically opens the talk by going through these various eras in human history, right? And I think it starts with the Egyptians, and it goes to the Greeks, and it goes to Romans in the time of Jesus, and it goes to the Enlightenment, and it goes to the European founding era of 1776, and it goes to the Civil War, and he goes through all of it, and he's telling a positive story, right? All of these are kind of kairos moments in human history. And then he says, but if I had a choice, if I was standing before God, and I had a choice of what era to live in, it would be this era, the era that I am living in, because it is the era in which I have the clearest sightlines to have an impact. And I just found that so powerful. Because, he was living in a roiling era, right? It's not like we knew where the civil rights movement was going to end up. It's not like that story was written and we knew it was going to be positive. It was the middle of the Vietnam War. It was really, really tough, right? Yeah. But I love this. I love the arc of that story. Here are all these eras in human history. And I wouldn't actually go back to the time of Socrates and Aristotle and Plato, even though King says, I would have loved to have been in those discussions, right? And I would have loved to have been around the table with Jesus. And I would have loved to have been with Voltaire and Rousseau and John Locke and the Enlightenment. I would have loved all of that, right? But I'm glad I was born now so I can have my impact now, right? So again, this goes back to the idea of what if you thought of yourself as one of the most privileged people in human history, and part of the privilege is you are here now.
I wonder what Dr. King would brought to the potluck for dinner, right? And also I think about his relationship to Thich Nhat Hanh.
Totally.
And how much Thich Nhat Hanh, the Buddhist priest and thinker, author, leader, who he learned a tremendous amount from, which influenced his leadership.
Totally. I thank you for bringing that up, and of course you would, Melissa, right? Because it's not like if you were to have stopped somebody in the street and been like, Dr. King and Thich Nhat Hanh, go, right? It's not like it's common knowledge, right? But of course you know it. I think it's part of your excellent leadership here and your stewardship here. So one of the things I love about Dr. King and Thich Nhat Hanh is the way I know the story is Thich Nhat Hanh, who's this Vietnamese Buddhist monk, right? Who is like on the other side of on the Vietnam side of the Vietnam War.
Yes.
Okay. He writes King and he says, we Vietnamese Buddhists view you as a bodhisattva. A bodhisattva is somebody who has attained enlightenment and could enter nirvana if they chose, but chooses to stay on earth to teach compassion, right? And he says, how far does your compassion extend? And he's not asking it as a scold, right? So one of the things I love about it's not a scold. It's like an invitation.
That's right.
It's like a call up, right?
And some of the invitations are the hardest questions to answer, or the hardest calls to answer, or the hardest things to hear are the greatest invitations.
Yeah, right. Like, hey, you know, it's like I watch. It's not when the basketball coach makes my son run for doing something wrong that my son gets upset. It's when the basketball coach says, you know, you could be here, right? You know, this is the kind of point guard you could be. That's when my son it gets anxious. You're called to your potential. Those are the sleepless nights.
Yeah. Let's take some questions from the audience. Okay. So I'm going to do my best, one, to read your handwriting, and we have about 5 more minutes. Okay, let's do this. All right. In your opinion, what will be the common teaching connected to all religions that can contribute to democracy?
Yeah. So I love it. So thank you for asking that question, in part because I wish I'd said these couple sentences in my talk, but I get to say them now. So virtually every civic contribution that I spoke of was a religious contribution. Notre Dame University, right? The Inner City Muslim Action Network, the Jewish hospital in Louisville. And it's not because I have a preference for religious contributions. It's because that's actually what makes up our civil society. Right? And so here's the thought exercise I want you to think about for a moment. Imagine if every institution founded by a faith community disappeared overnight. In New York City, what would be gone? Columbia would be gone, founded by Presbyterians, right? Was NYU founded by a faith community?
No.
Okay. One of the handful of, right. But by the way, the people at Columbia don't know that it was founded by Presbyterians, right? Right? 7 of the 8 Ivy League schools founded by faith communities. My point is that one of the dish that religious communities bring to the American potluck, I think that they bring spiritual dishes, right? But they also bring very concrete dishes in the form of civic institutions. So the 6 of the 9 refugee resettlement organizations in the country, founded by faith communities, right? The largest providers of social services after the federal government, Catholic Charities and the Salvation Army. Just imagine, right? The refugee crisis, the migrant crisis is challenging enough as it is in cities like New York and Chicago. Imagine if Catholic Charities and the Salvation Army disappeared overnight. What would happen? Right? So one of the things we take for granted in this country are the contributions of these faith-based identity communities. Part of what Interfaith America is founded on is we should cherish those contributions, we should appreciate them, and we should look to bridge them better. Mm-hmm. How much better would it be if the various faith-based social service agencies worked positively, worked together even more constructively, right? Mm-hmm. So I think that is a major contribution. It's not the only contribution. Again, there are spiritual contributions. There's contributions in our language. I mean, if you think about how we understand the nation, City on a Hill, Almost Chosen People, Better Angels of Our Nature, Cathedral of Humanity, Beloved Community, all of these are contributions that are created by religious communities. The video that you saw earlier, the Interfaith America video, what we are very deliberately doing is creating a myth for the nation out of the distinctive language of different religious communities, right? A Sangha, a Langar, a pilgrim.
What's the line between dealing with marginalization and stewing in victimhood? How does that impact the concept and work of social justice?
Look, I'm going to say it again. There are 8 billion people in the world. 8 billion people. And I want you to just think for a moment. Again, this is not a scold. It's just like a window. I just want you to think for a moment, right? It is 7 o'clock on whatever, a Thursday night in New York, right? Just yes. Where are the other 7.9 billion people in the world right now? What's the kind of space they're in? Does it have indoor plumbing? Does it have refrigeration? Does it have catered food in the back? Right? I think that part of how we understand ourselves, the term marginalization is a term with a reference point. It's a relative term, right? If you think about the world as 8 billion people, my wild guess is that almost all of us are closer to the center than the margins. I am not scolding you. I am inviting you, right? What if you thought of yourself as closer to the center than the margins? What if you thought of yourself as someone principally with privilege and responsibility? Actually, what a beautiful way to think of yourself. What a magnificent thing to think. What can I give to the world? How magnificent. Virtually every religious tradition invests that idea in people. You are made with a special worthiness, and you have a special responsibility. If your material conditions match that spiritual idea, alhamdulillah, praise be to God. Probably most of ours do. I don't know everybody's individual story, right? But it is probably the case that relative to the rest of the world, those 8 billion people, our material conditions are closer to the idea of abundance than scarcity relative to the rest of the world. Alhamdulillah. This is not eat your broccoli. The people on the other side of the world are starving. This is how amazing is it to be somebody who can wake up in the morning and think to themselves, what do I give today? How amazing.
You know, it's making me think about one of my teachers, Reverend Angel Kyoto Williams. Often talks, wonderful person, often talks about we continually, when we return to ourselves, we remember what is. And when we can remember what is, we know our innate truth, not what the society says of us. So what the society may say of me as a black woman, you know, yada, 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 blah, 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 but my remembrance of my innate truth does not have to match what that is, even in this body that I live in every day. And I find that that's a lot of what you're saying here is that out there may say this, but inside, and what I know to be true, I actually have, this is who I am in the image of what I believe God to be, or what I believe my faith is. And so I find that when you can be with what is, you're able to have some more freedom in that and to move around in the world.
I think what we're doing here is we're stacking wisdom, right? Because that is like a deep sense of self-knowing.
Yeah.
And then there is what a tradition might teach, which
Right.
again is almost always the idea of a special worthiness and a special responsibility, whether that is you have the last prophet, or Jesus died for your sins, or you have the vicar of Christ on earth who is your guide, or you were chosen. All of these are ideas of a special worthiness and a special responsibility. And then there's, also the reality of the other 8 billion people in the world and how they live.
That's right.
Right? So all, this is a stack, but I think the stack has a very similar message. And it's a similar invitation.
Mm-hmm. And I think the stack invites us that we have a lot to learn from each other. We are running out of time, so I'm going to ask one more question. And I didn't get to all the audience questions, but we're going to be here for a while. So ask each other these questions. Get into conversation. Use the menu that we gave. Ask questions that you didn't hear from me. But my last question for you is, how do you, Eboo, in the work you do day in and day out, remain hopeful at the personal and systemic level?
Yeah. So I mean, what's the great? So I mean, I guess it's a lot of things, right? Like one is it's just like a spiritual thing, right? Like God made the universe a beautiful place. God made the universe a beautiful place, and He made us His servant and representative, His Abd and Khalifa, His steward, and gave us His breath, and that is just a spiritual reality. And so that is like a pillar for me, right? So that's one thing. I'm just a dispositionally positive person. And actually, part of what I found interesting is for a while, when I was in college, actually, I became an angry activist. And one of the reasons for that is because that was my initiation into ACT. Those were the people I hung out with. And so I kind of thought like that was the only way to be an activist, right?
I was right there with you.
Yeah, and like 6 months into like yelling at people all the time, I was like, this is not me. But I didn't have any other models of being an activist until somebody mentions to me, have you ever heard of Dorothy Day? Until somebody gives me a faith-based model, right? And that was then my off-ramp. But I discover in that kind of angry activism phase, like I'm like literally yelling at people on the outside and being like, this is not who I am in the like they must know that I'm faking it. Like they must be like laughing at me, you know? Like, buddy, you are not really angry. You know, I'm just not, I am just dispositionally a positive person. I just am, right? And I understand that other people are dispositionally other ways. Like my 16-year-old at like 7 in the morning is a dispositionally not a positive person. You know, he's just, and so I think that's the second thing. I'm going to quote Jerry Garcia on this, and I think he's like super wise on this. He's like, look, man, he's like, listen, the Grateful Dead are like a dog on a June day with their head out an open car window at 40 miles an hour. It's just like we're just like the happiest thing on the planet, right? And then he's like, listen, if you can do something that doesn't hurt somebody, you're lucky. If you can do something that helps people, that's great. If you can do something that doesn't hurt people, that helps people, that is something you love, I mean, like it's like winning the lottery every day. So that's kind of how I feel. It kind of drives my staff nuts, a little bit actually, right? They're like, dude, again? You know, like, weren't you this happy yesterday? You know? But I don't know. Why wouldn't you feel that if you lived our lives?
I want to thank everyone for coming, especially Eboo. Thank you for the gift of tonight.
Thank you all. Thank you for coming. Thank you for your leadership and your presence.
And I want to thank everyone to remind you, tonight, again, inside of each of us is a unique gift or talent that this world desperately needs. And I started my talk with, we're trying to move democracy forward where we each feel we have equal belonging. And I believe it's up to us, and I think you said that, to find what we're bringing to the potluck, name the contribution, and then give it as hard as we can. So thank you all. Please enjoy some, I think, cocktails and dessert outside. I mean, no cocktails, just drinks, non-alcoholic, outside. You know where I'm going after this. And again, ask each other some questions and be with one another, be in community. Thank you so much. Good night.